The Monster in My Room is Acting Weird. Finale by Corvus 1992. The first thing I did was go out and buy some locks, then put them on the outside of my bedroom door. There was no way in hell the monster wasn't going to come after me once it heard me going to the attic. So I got 6 locks and put them all on the door, hoping it'd be enough to keep it trapped inside. It's a supernatural being, clearly, but it's corporeal too. Something limited to the same laws of physics as us. So I at least felt reasonably sure that it couldn't simply walk through the walls like some creepy ghost. Worst case scenario, I'd hear it banging on the door to break through, and then I could throw myself out a window? Didn't matter. The point was, I'd have at least a few seconds head start. I messaged Tony to tell him about my plan. Then I installed the locks and immediately locked the door. I felt like if I wasted any time, I'd lose my nerve. So as soon as I'd locked the door, I went and grabbed the ladder from the storage cupboard and placed it beneath the door. I climbed it, and with all the bravery I could summon, I pushed aside the entrance to the attic and lifted myself up, trying hard not to think about what I was going to find. The smell of decay hit me at full force. I looked around. There were a few boxes around me. Not many, just old photo albums. Junk that I didn't want to throw away, but also didn't want taking up any valuable space. Things I hadn't even looked at in a room I hadn't even been in since I first moved in. But soon enough, as my eyes traveled around the attic, they fell upon a strange lump. At first, I mistook it for a pile of dirty clothes, which was odd because, as I said, I hadn't been up there in years. I moved closer to it, the stench invading my nostrils, and then I saw it was skin. Gray, translucent, covered it in clear, viscous substance that looked like slime. I looked down as I drew closer, realizing all too late that I'd just stepped in slime, as it was covering the floor surrounding the fleshy mass. My eyes watering from the overpowering smell of death, I walked closer and closer until I was right next to the pile of skin. It was unmistakably the skin of the creature that had been sitting in my room for all my life. I sighed heavily. I should have been terrified, but my immediate reaction was sadness. The creature had been in my life for as long as I could remember, yet was so silent and inanimate that it might as well have been an ornament rather than a living thing. Why should I care if it died? And yet, it was a peaceful creature. It was a strange creature that I didn't understand, but it wasn't an evil monster. It had been murdered by an evil monster, and as little as I know about the creature, I know he deserved better than the fate that befell him. I saw some bones mingled in amongst the skin, partially protruding. There was no skeleton, no form to make sense of the mass. It was a chaotic mess of all the things that make a living thing, scrambled into a slimy jumble. I noticed, though, a few feet away from the former body was a jawbone. I picked it up. It wasn't covered in a slime like anything else. And the teeth were sharp but tiny, like a puppy's teeth, though the jaw was clearly much larger than any breed of dog. My free hand reached to the back of the head, studying the lumps where the monster had bitten me. They felt quite large, but the raised scabs on the center of each lump were very small. Puzzled, I tried to process how I'd been bitten by the teeth of a dead creature. I'll admit the lack of sleep was really affecting my ability to think through things, and all I could imagine was the monster ripping off the jawbone and using it to bite me every night. Dumb, I know, but Then I pondered, how does it have the creature's skin? Its skull? It didn't appear as though the monster was wearing the creature's skin, since as far as I could tell, the entire body was here. It definitely wasn't hiding within the creature's body. His remains were in the attic, and I'd left the monster in my bedroom when I locked the door. Eventually, I left the attic, descending the ladder carefully, feeling dizzy with the stress of my discovery, and ended up back on the floor of the upstairs landing. The whole time I'd been up there, no doubt my footsteps were very audible from my bedroom. The monster hadn't made a sound. No attempt to break out of my room and stop me from finding out what was in the attic. I didn't care why anymore. I'd asked myself so many questions with nothing but my worried mind echoing the questions back at me endlessly. It didn't matter why, or who, or how. I just wanted it over. Fueled by my exhaustion rather than bravery, I went to the kitchen and grabbed one of the biggest and sharpest knives, and I walked back up the stairs. I unlocked the 6 locks on my bedroom door and kicked it open, with every intention of hacking and slashing wildly until the thing wasn't moving. But I didn't even get a chance to raise my knife. I was paralyzed before I'd made it 2 steps into my room. The monster was standing on 2 legs that somewhat resembled human legs, though with the skin looking like jelly, the veins bulging out of the surface. The 2 back limbs of the monster dangled around knee length, uselessly. The monster was wearing its baggy skin like its ugliest dress, no longer living inside it, but wearing it over its real form. Its eyes stared at me, unblinking, and I saw for the first time the skin finally tighter in some areas as the monster's true form stretched out the wearable flesh. The hole in its neck, a thin horizontal gash. I watched in horror as it widened slightly, just enough to show me that it held teeth, bigger than those on the creature's jawbone, less sharp, straighter, human teeth. And there, dribbling out, was the clear liquid that had been dripping onto the floor every night. That it dribbled into my orange juice to make me sleep. It was saliva. I was now certain. The pounding sound in my ears eventually lessened enough that I could hear the monster's desperate wheezing breaths. I didn't know what it was, but I knew what it wanted. I could hear from the hunger in its breath, in every drop of drool that fell to the floor. Still terrified, I knew I wouldn't land a hit with the knife before it could attack me. But inside, I was seething, and I couldn't stand the silence anymore. "I know what you've done," I began, not taking my eyes off its face. "You killed him. You took his place. You tricked me. All so you could kill me, too?" I raised the knife, pointed it at the monster like it was a loaded gun, and not a useless object that required me moving to cause any injury. "Go back to wherever the hell you came from. If you want to kill me, I'm not making it easy for you. I'll rip you to shreds." I heard the conviction in my words, but my voice shook. My entire body shook. I tried to sound like I meant it. Hell, I did mean it. I didn't want to die, but if I had to, I was taking it with me somehow. I waited, my gaze fixed on the monster, blinking as little as possible. I heard a crash downstairs, but somehow I kept myself focused on the monster. The monster responded as though I'd said nothing. It simply stood there and continued to stare at me. Then, after a few seconds, the muzzle of the monster, the muzzle that my creature also had, opened with a sharp crackling noise, and out of it slithered a tongue, long, slightly pointed, and tiny with tendrils on the underside. It reached down past the muzzle, moving further downwards until it reached its next mouth. I watched, nauseous, as it licked the saliva away that was gathered at its mouth, and then slowly the grotesque tongue made its way back into the mouth of the muzzle, all while the monster's eyes had never looked away from me. I lost it. "What the hell are you?" I screamed at it. The monster's breath came in deep wheezes that screamed in anticipation. Any second it was going to pounce, I could sense it, and I mentally prepared myself even as I stood so still. Its eyes glaring at me, the puddle on the floor growing larger with frequent drips from the monster's neck. I waited for its attack as its rasping breaths grew louder and more ravenous, but instead it spoke. "I am everyone." It replied to my question I never expected an answer from. It spoke in my voice. I felt frozen in place, doomed to watch my own demise, but I knew it was now or never. With the biggest effort I'd ever managed to make, I wrenched my body free from my own fear, and, knife still raised, I ran at the monster. Its front limb, now half hand and half paw, grabbed my wrist and angled my arm so the knife was pointed more towards me. I wrestled against its strength for a few moments, but it was futile. So I loosened my grip on the knife and it hit the ground. Its other arm grabbed me by the throat and turned around, and instantly I felt my airway cut off. Kicking out loudly, I could feel myself only making contact with loose flesh. No bone, no muscle, nothing that can cause injury. My other arm free, I punched against the monster's skull, the side of its neck, trying desperately to land a hit that resulted in some slack in its grip, but to no avail. I was panicking. I didn't see a way to survive this. Suddenly, the grips on my neck and wrist not only loosened, but released altogether. I gulped in air, and only when I saw the monster turn its back to me did I realize why. The monster's back had two messy wounds, blood flowing over the folds of baggy outer skin. I looked and saw Tony standing there by my door to my bedroom, holding a hammer. The claw part was bloody. My relief soon turned to fear as the monster grabbed Tony, who was still using the hammer to make ferocious contact with any part of its body he could reach. I looked around and saw my knife lying on the floor. Picking it up, I held it as high as I could above my head and managed to stab the monster in its head. It let out a scream, hoarse and grating to the ears, and I knew it was incensed with fury, as well as being hurt. I had no chance to retrieve the knife before it rushed me, knocking the breath out of me as I hit the ground. The muzzle cracked open, and it lowered its jaws until they enveloped my throat. The tiny, sharp teeth pierced my skin, and I let out a strangled cry as the jaws closed tighter around my neck. I tried to pry them off me, but my fingers were slick with blood from the teeth breaking my skin, and I felt a sharp pain running down my chest before a loud crunching noise. The jaws relinquished their contact on me, and another screech from the monster. Its weight disappeared from my body as it moved away from me to attack Tony once again. I felt warm blood trickling down my chest and stomach, but I didn't look. As soon as I struggled to my feet, Tony's screams, shrill and pained, filled the air, and as I reached for the hammer, he dropped next to my bed. I saw why he was making those screams. Tony's left arm, entirely red and glistening, was torn to ribbons. Flesh lay in tatters, the monster's jaws ripping it, tearing it until it reached the wrist. Then, with one final sickening tug, the skin freed itself from Tony's arm, and the skin disappeared into the monster's muzzle mouth. Then the hideous serpentine tongue emerged, this time from the mouth in the neck, and it reached into the mouth of the muzzle, coiling itself around the bloody, slightly chewed flesh like a snake, then carried it back to the opening of the neck. I watched, sick in my throat, as the human teeth from the neck, mouth, chewed Tony's skin, blood-tinged saliva dripping onto the floor and spitting out with each squelching bite. The monster was too busy eating, savoring Tony's flesh, and taunting him. It didn't see me. It probably had forgotten I even existed in that moment. So when I put as much force as I could behind the hammer, it collided with the monster's head, with the sensation of crunching and breaking. It landed on its side, and before it had even a moment to recover, I brought the hammer down on its head, and its body again and again and again. Every bone I felt give way to the weight of the hammer was motivational to land another blow. Only when my arms faltered and the hammer slipped from my grasp did I stop. At that point, the monster somewhat resembled the creature's body in the attic. It looked down at myself. I looked down at myself for the first time and saw my shirt was torn and bloody, with lacerations along my chest that stung, but didn't look too deep. "Nate," Tony called to me, weakly. I went to my walk-in closet and got some shirts, then walked over to him and wrapped his arm as tightly as I could in them. Blood was everywhere. "I'm so sorry," I said. "I should never have gotten you involved." "Don't get me involved and you'd be dead," he replied. "I'll call an ambulance. Just stay there, okay?" I said, reaching for my phone. But his uninjured arm batted my hand away as it reached for the phone in my pocket. "Don't be stupid. How will you explain it? Get me downstairs. I'll walk a bit away from the house and then call them." His voice was quiet, but he sounded determined, so I agreed. His intact arm around me for support, we slowly descended the stairs. His face scrunched up in pain the entire time. It took 10 minutes, but eventually we reached my front door. "What are you going to say happened?" I asked him. "Dog," he answered, his eyes closed tightly as another wave of agony passed through him. "Call me when you're at the hospital, yeah?" I asked, worried he couldn't even make it to the front door, let alone down the street. He nodded, and without another word, he opened the front door and stumbled outside. I watched him until he got further enough away that I was sure someone would be able to help him if he collapsed. I closed the door. I went back to my room and looked at the monster. It was a strange shapeshifter of sorts. I'm certain of that. It had replicated itself into the monster and was in the process of replicating itself into me. It was some sort of hybrid of the two. Features of the both of us mixed into something new. It was definitely dead. The good thing about having wooden floors is the cleanup is much easier than if I had carpets. It took a good while, but my room eventually didn't look like a murder scene, and I disposed of the monster's remains. As for the creature, I buried him in my garden and planted a few little plants over where he's buried. It probably sounds stupid, but he died for no good reason, and he didn't deserve it. I wanted to remember and acknowledge him in my own small way. Tony is going to be okay too. Okay in this sense is a pretty relative term. He's going to need some surgeries, but it looks like he shouldn't lose his arm. And he's not going to die, so at the very least I'm grateful for that. He hadn't believed my crazy story about the monster if he hadn't gotten involved. Come to my house when he did, I wouldn't be typing this right now. I owe him a great deal. As for me, I now have 0 beans in my room. Just me. It feels very weird, but frankly I'm relieved. It's horrible to think what would have happened if the monster had succeeded, though. Does it kill you and go back to where it came from, or does it become you? How many seemingly normal people in our lives, I wonder, are just imposters? Hey guys, 4Shotbot here. I want to appreciate all of you guys for watching and listening to these stories. This story actually kind of took a turn that I wasn't expecting. I really liked it, and this is definitely one of my favorite stories now, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. So, I will see you guys all in the next one.